The main issue that I have is not knowing everything that is available to me and jumping from platform to platform trying to achieve something.
The government can help citizens to use e-public services by organizing free education.
More IT courses focused on practical application should be organized in the local environment.
It is difficult for me to follow the progress in IT technology. Without the help of my children, I couldn't manage it.
I was pleasantly surprised of how easy that was, actually.
Meni se zdijo najbolj učinkovite aplikacije, ki temeljijo na biometriji. Tudi naše stranke imajo raje mobilne aplikacije kot pa spletne.
Zakaj sta torej nujna digitalizacija demokratičnih procesov in uzakonjene sistema e-peticij? Najmanj zato, da nam o predaji štafete ne bo nerodno, ko nas bodo vsi ogorčeni spraševali, zakaj lahko na primer Latvijci elektronsko podpisujejo peticije svojemu parlamentu že od leta 2011.
Z elektronsko storitvijo e-vročanje sedaj prevzemam priporočeno pošto v uradnih zadevah hitro, kjerkoli, kadarkoli, s pomočjo prenosnega računalnika ali mobilnega telefona. Povsem enostavno se z osebnim certifikatom prijavim v varni predal e-uprave in prevzamem svoje dokumente.
Single sign-on is sometimes not working as expected. Also, connectivity and navigations through different systems can be quite complex.
Pridobitev digitalnega identifikacijskega potrdila bi lahko potekala tudi preko videoklica in ne le v živo na upravi.
Želel bi si, da bi bil elektronski dostop do raznih potrdil, ki jih izdaja država, enostavnejši, tako kot je enostaven dostop do COVID potrdila.
Kot študent, ki se izobražuje v tujini, sem imel pozitivno izkušnjo, ko sem ugotovil, da moram prijaviti spremembo svojega začasnega naslova v tujini. Na e-upravi sem pravo vlogo našel, jo izpolnil in tudi oddal vse skupaj v manj kot 5 minutah.
Največji oviri pri uporabi elektronskih javnih storitev vidim v dejstvu, da državljani ne poznamo verjetno vseh, kar pomeni še več promocije za njih, in pa v dejstvu, da vsi državljani niso vajeni elektronskega poslovanja in je potrebno razmisliti, kako te storitve približati tudi njim.
Ko enkrat uspeš pridobiti in si namestiti svojo digitalno identiteto, je uporaba e-uprave in drugih e-storitev države dokaj enostavna stvar. Ko boste to uredili, bo nas uporabnikov vse več, pa še bolj zadovoljni bomo.
Digitalizacija, izpolnjevanje obrazcev, oddajanje vlog, delo na daljavo, komunikacija s šolo, spletno bančništvo. Brez digitalnih storitev si danes ne predstavljam več aktivnega državljanstva.
Okay, so now we will start the session. Dear ladies and gentlemen, distinguished speakers and participants, my name is Simon de la Corda from the Institute for Electronic Participation, and I would like to welcome you at this session entitled End Users, Vulnerable Groups and E-Democracy. First of all, I would like to thank the conference organizers for having these videos prepared, which capture, in my opinion, the very essence of this panel, which will address already well-established facts that citizens are facing different obstacles relating to the digital public services, such as accessibility, complexity, lack of skills and information. I believe we all saw some of those issues also captured in those videos from the everyday citizens. Of course, those issues are often resulting in decreased ability, motivation, and trust to digitally engage with the public sector. Therefore, this session is, in my opinion, a pivotal in that regard, as it highlights views and experience of end users, inclusive and co-creation practices, as well participatory methods aiming to overcome above mentioned obstacles. I believe some of you are also familiar with the latest Eurobarometer research on topic of digital rights and principles, which is also highlighting these concerns as expressed by the European Citizens Survey. So I will add this now into the chat room, so for those who would like to have more knowledge about this. To continue, therefore, I'm very looking forward to the opportunities to address these issues with the following experts and recognized speakers in the field. We will start this session with Elisa Lironi from the European Citizen Action Service, followed by Katrine Maria Krzeminski from the Danish Agency for Digitalization, Office for Digital Services, Nea Samar Brencic from the ISRIS Institute, Brigitte Dane from the Symbiosa Genesi Social Enterprise, and Sara Kjellstrand from Funka Organization in Sweden. We will add detailed presentation of each speaker and each organization will publish in the chat. But before giving the floor to our distinguished panelists, I would like to share some essential housekeeping guidelines for this session. After each presentation, there will be an opportunity for speakers to provide a question from the audience to each speaker. Please use the comment option in the user option line below in the Zoom platform. You can also share your comments and views in the chat. I believe we are now set to go, and I would like to invite Elisa Lironi from the European Citizen Action Service to the first presentation. Please, Elisa, the floor is yours.
Okay, hi, Simon, and hello to everyone. Thank you again for inviting me to join this distinguished panel. My name is Elisa Lironi, and I work for the European Citizen Action Service, which is an NGO based here in Brussels and has been for 30 years already empowering citizens to exercise their rights. And my expertise is in digital democracy. So today I would just like to give you a short presentation. I know that Simon will be strict on time and it's a maximum of 8 minutes. I will give you just a short presentation on what is digital democracy, what do we mean by it, and how can it help connect citizens to its governments. So I will just share my screen. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, we can see it well. Yes, we can. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. So my presentation will be around digital democracy and collective intelligence and exploring new ways exploring new forms of governance. First of all, let's start with the baseline. What is digital democracy? So digital democracy or e-democracy refers to simply the use of information and communication technology to support democratic decision-making in order to enhance democratic institutions and democratic processes. And so this is the general, most simple way of defining digital democracy. It's basically using technology to enhance democratic processes. And it refers to two actors in particular, the governments, which is comprised of administrations, representative political parties, etc., and its citizens. Sometimes digital democracy is confused with the notion of direct democracy, but in our case, this is not what it is meant to be. It is simply a way to complement representative democracy by adding elements of empowerment and more direct participation through technology. As I said, there are three aspects of e-democracy, and as I said, these are the relations between the government on the one side and the citizens on the other side. And I have kind of regrouped these different notions of e-democracy into three main types. The first one is focused on the government, and it is around e-governance. So basically how ICT is being used in order to enhance public services and public administration. The second one I would like to cluster is called the aspect of e-transparency. And here it's how the government is mainly using technology in order to make its work more transparent for citizens. And citizens here are having a more passive role. The third aspect is e-participation. And here, as you can see, it is a more active role of the citizens towards its government. And e-participation is the use of information and communication technology to allow more interaction in policy making amongst the governments and between the governments and its citizens. Now, this interaction can be not very strong. It can be all around certain things such as e-consultations, but in the best case scenario, it is really allowing the citizens to actually co-create policies together with its government. I already mentioned a few types of e-participation. Today I will just focus on e-participation because I don't have much time. And it is also what we work on the most. E-participation across Europe can be in many forms. As you can see, and probably you already know, there are cities working on participatory budgeting, even different countries working around crowdsourcing processes, e-initiatives, e-consultations from governments, and even e-voting. All of these are under the umbrella of e-participation. In this slide, I would just like to give you some examples of how e-participation has been implemented by governments and together with citizens. For example, in the case of participatory budgeting, we know that Paris is a very good example with its mayor already since many, many years, Hidalgo, who has been doing this big participatory budgeting in Paris. And here, citizens have been called in the beginning to kind of experiment a bit with participatory budgeting. But then it was so used by the citizens that the Mayor Hidalgo actually decided to prolong it and to put even a bigger pool of funding for citizens to actually think on how to invest this budget in their own cities. And it has been working really well. And the mayor has also complemented the participatory budgeting activities with other types of e-participation tools, such as e-initiatives and e-consultations. Now I would like to show you three other different organizations. The first one is manavals.lv, which was born as a sort of citizen organization in Latvia already 10 years ago, even more than 10 years ago. Sci-Fi is an NGO based in Greece, also providing with e-participation platforms, and we have Citizens Foundation in Iceland. These three are showcasing how e-participation can be actually implemented by citizens and by NGOs. So when I showed you the case of Paris with Mayor Hidalgo, we can say that that was more of a top-down approach where you have, local governments, national governments, or even EU government trying to have a top-down approach to e-participation. And here I would like to just showcase you these three examples of how citizens' e-participation can actually come from bottom up. In the case of Latvia, as I said in 2010, there were two citizens who decided that there was the need of a technological platform to allow citizens to actually propose initiatives for legislation procedures to their own parliament members. And this exercise became so popular, and citizens were constantly asking other citizens to sign petitions for their cause, that nowadays in Latvia, this is actually an official platform used by the parliament in order to get citizens to contribute to the creation of legislations. In Latvia, now a citizen can actually start an e-initiative and ask other citizens to sign it. And once it reaches a certain threshold, members of the parliament it is mandatory for them to debate about them and to vote upon these legislations. So this is a very powerful instrument. In Sci-Fi in Greece is also an NGO working on these platforms, and Citizens Foundation, I will show you in another slide, has also been pioneers on, for example, the constitutional reform in Iceland. Now, just to conclude this slide, there are another two examples that I want to give you. Discuto, which is a technological platform creator in Austria, and Citizen Lab, which is the same thing in Belgium. These two are private companies. Now, I always make a distinction between the ones that I presented before and these two, which are more private companies, because I just want to show you that there are different philosophies on also how to approach e-participation. There are some private companies that are creating wonderful platforms that are then used by governments, but there are also other NGOs that are creating open source platforms that are very transparent on how they code their platforms, and that can be also easily taken up by anyone. Why are we fostering e-participation? What are the benefits that e-participation can bring to democracy? Throughout my research, I can list you at least 5 ways in which e-participation has the potential of enhancing democracy. For example, it can enhance participation and active citizenship. It can ensure a learning process, because obviously when citizens are in co-creation of policies, they also learn much more about democracy and how decisions are taken. It engages young people in policymaking, because young people are now very, let's say, tech savvy, and they use applications and their mobile phones, even sometimes when they need to give their preferences to decision makers. Ensuring innovative ideas for policy making. For example, crowdsourcing is a way to gather the opinions and the innovative solutions from a big crowd. That can also help. And then increasing political trust and legitimacy. And this is almost self-evident. When policymakers reach out to citizens to ask them for their opinion, this also creates a stronger relationship between citizens and their policymakers in the process. Just a couple of 2 slides before the recommendations on 2 cases of how these e-participation mechanisms have been working. There is the famous constitutional reform crowdsourcing that started already more than 10 years ago. It was right after the economic crisis that the decision makers of Iceland decided that they had to be more open to citizens to gather their opinions on how they wanted their future country to be. And they decided to start a crowdsourcing on the constitution of Iceland to revise it. Now, I'm not going to go into detail of the process. You can ask me also in your questions. But basically what happened was that there was a crowdsourcing platform online, and citizens first in a big group and then in a smaller constitutional council worked together to gather all sorts of ideas to draft a new constitution to be passed in the parliament. Unfortunately, this did not happen because it stalled in the parliament, but they did not give up. And what happened is that in 2019, there is now an ongoing new constitutional reform process that started, and they have actually learned from the lessons of the last constitutional revision that failed and started complementing the tech crowdsourcing platform together with also offline events such as
Elisa,
deliberative polling.
Sorry for interruption. You have 1 minute left.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
And surveys also from academics. So they really used a combination of experts and alternative methods also to complement the technological side to be more inclusive. In the second case, I won't go too much into this, but it was about a co-creation of a new law on traffic in Finland, also started off by an NGO, asking citizens in different phases, problem mapping, problem solving, evaluation, and law writing in order to help them work. Unfortunately, this was also never completed. So I'll go directly to the recommendations. What do we have to be careful of when we're talking about digital democracy? There are 3 main challenges in digital democracy, which are mainly accessibility, representativeness, and impact and feedback. So the recommendations here are, when you're starting an e-participation process, governments need to be very careful about the accessibility, or trying to fill in the digital divide. Accessibility is everything that concerns on the user friendliness of the technology, how this process is being communicated. So it was nice to see in the video in the introduction where citizens were like, these are very interesting initiatives, but I knew nothing about them. So how is this communicated? And of course, how is it inclusive? Are these technological platforms open for people with disabilities? Are people in minority groups participating? So everything that is around that. The second recommendation has to be around representativeness. I have analyzed consultations where of the European Union, for example, where there were only 3 participants. Now, this is not representative at all, of course, of the population of the European Union. So that is something that you need to be very careful of. And there are many ways to ensure representativeness. The third and last is around impact and feedback. So making sure that citizens' contributions impact in some way, or at least managing their expectations and making sure that they understand where their efforts and time will go. And also to close the feedback loop and making sure that you always inform citizens of what happened with it. Often overlooked, and this is my final thing, are human resources needed, financial resources needed, training of public authorities in order to implement these processes, and of course, very strong guidelines and rules of those processes itself. If you trust the process, and if the process is done in the right way, then there is a lot of potential for digital democracy to actually improve our democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elisa, very much to you for this interesting presentation. Since I would like to keep this session within the time frame, I would suggest that we skip the question for this particular presentation. And I'm really hoping that panelists will follow this short time frame that we agreed on. So I'm inviting Katrine Maria Krzeminski from the Danish Agency for Digitalization to give us her presentation. Please, Katrine, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm also very glad to be invited to give a presentation from this very interesting panel. And let me see if I can screen share. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes, we do.
Okay, thank you. So I will talk a little bit about how digitalization is both a challenge and can also be part of the solution for helping the inclusion of vulnerable groups. First of all, Denmark is what we call a digital front runner, because we have had digitalization like for many, many years. And we are always voted like world champion of e-government, because so much of our public services are digitalized already. And all Danes are large-scale consumers of these digital services. And why is that? Well, it's because it was actually made mandatory by law in Denmark in 2014 that you have to be a digital citizen. You have to have your digital e-box, your inbox for mail from the public sector. A lot of online self-services were made mandatory so that municipalities and other public authorities had to provide these services online for everybody. So this means that we are a highly digitalized society. But of course, this has, everybody's talking about the digital divide, and this increased digitalization, it has a tendency to shift the responsibility from the public sector onto the citizens themselves. They have to be more capable of conducting their own businesses with the public sector. And of course, that is a challenge for certain groups. Therefore, also in Denmark, it has been a strategic effort since 2011. How do we, in the best way, include these vulnerable groups? It can be the elderly, it can be people with disabilities, minority groups, all of those who can find it difficult to maneuver in this digitalized world where it's becoming more and more difficult to get like the face-to-face help that you were used to. One of the things that we do is that we have, and that was also mentioned in the video, that we have like very local collaboration with all kinds of citizens organizations. So whenever we try to develop something new, we bring it past these organizations, be it for the elderly or the disabled, so that we can get their input as to how this new solution should be accessible to them. So we have like a huge network always contributing to everything that we develop. And we are also trying to develop new digital solutions that can help with the inclusion of these vulnerable groups. One of the things that we have created is what we call a digital power of attorney, where you as a citizen, you can grant the power of attorney to somebody else so they can help you do some of the things that you need to do online. But this is only like for digital self-services. We have like a citizens platform called Borger.dk or Citizen DK. And on that platform, you have a lot of digital self-services. So you can grant somebody the power of attorney to help you with some of these transactions. It was implemented in 2013, but as I said, it's only for self-services solutions, and the penetration or the implementation of this digital power of attorney, unfortunately, hasn't been that great. As it says here, it works on only 40 out of 800 possible digital self-service solutions. So of course, there's something, it's not quite matching the needs neither of the citizens nor the public authorities that were supposed to use this digital power of attorney. So what we've learned is that the scope is way too limited, because you don't only need a power of attorney for digital self-services, you need to be able to easily give all kinds of digital power of attorney. Like in writing, you have to call somebody, and there are many different areas where people who need help have to be able to give this power to somebody else. And as I said, the implementation rate, it's way too low, and it doesn't meet the needs. And the authority says that the scope is so limited that it's not a great solution for them to use, unfortunately. So now we're working on a new and improved, hopefully, digital power of attorney in the future. So it will be easier to grant, much easier to grant these power of attorneys. It has to meet more needs, not just for online self-services. It has to meet all the different, encompass all the different scenarios where as a citizen you need help. We're also creating an overview. So again, with the transparency, for example, and helping the vulnerable groups with easier access. So we want to create an overview of these are all the digital power of attorneys that you have given to someone. What have you given the power to? When does it expire? All these kinds of information will be gathered in one place so that it will be much easier to manage for the citizens these powers of attorney. And we're doing this not only with power of attorney, we're also doing it with other different sectors of public information. And it has to be easier for the public authorities to manage, to administer, because if not, as we can see with the current solution, they're not going to use it. And if they're not using it, if it won't be for the benefit of the citizens, and it won't have the effect that we're looking for, namely the inclusion of these vulnerable groups. So to conclude our reflections, or like our learnings here in Denmark, is that, well, this increased digitalization, it puts a great demand on citizens' IT skills and the shifting of the responsibility. And that means that we as a society have a greater responsibility to ensure that nobody is left behind. And that means that it's more important, it becomes increasingly more important that how we design these public services, as Elisa also said, they have to be more accessible to all citizens. They have to be user-friendly, they have to be communicated. By creating the overview, we're also trying to make it more accessible. And another finding we have from Denmark, being that we have been so digitalized for such a long time, and we have had a strategic effort of including vulnerable groups, it's also that we will never be able to include all citizens. We calculate there's a ratio of between 10 to 15% of citizens who will either need help or won't be able to participate in the digital society. And of course, we always have to have that in mind, so we secure that for these people, they can get the help that they need and the services that they need also. But the digital power of attorney, it's just one example of a new digital service that, if it's built right, it can give help with the needs of the citizens. So digitalization is both a challenge for the vulnerable groups, but it can also be part of the solution. That was all. Yeah. I think I kept my time frame, right?
Yes, Katrina, excellent. Since we are just right on the track in time manner, we can take 2 questions for you. Katrina, if you agreed, I will just forward it to you. The first question is from Theo, which is asking, is transparency and consent enough to ensure legal protection if system is abused? So I really hope you can answer this in 1 minute so that we can continue.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. The question is transparency and consent enough to ensure legal protection if system is abused? The questions are also available in the Q&A tab below.
Okay. Is transparency and consent enough to ensure legal protection? I mean, we're trying to build the solution so that it is. We have, of course, had problems with abuse, but it's not on the system side. It's more when people, it's more on the people side, where somebody gives a power of attorney to somebody they shouldn't give it to. And that's from the public authorities' perspective, it's very difficult to handle. But we've now created like a whole office that is manned 24/7, where if you think that it's been abused, that you can call in and get help immediately, so that we can shut it down or do something to help you if something has been abused. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And the second question.
Yeah, falls into the wrong hands. It goes with the same. Yeah. Yes, of course, we try to set up these checks and balances also digitally. I mean, in Denmark, you have a citizen's ID an EID that you use to authenticate who you are. And you always have to use that when you get the power of attorney. And there's a whole process of validating that this is the person who are actually getting it. But as I said, there are, of course, incidents where we can't control that somebody is feeling forced to give the power of attorney to somebody else. But again, the same, we've set up like a hotline for everybody who feel that there's something wrong, so that they can get the help, hopefully, that they need.
Perfect, Katina. Thank you very much for additional clarifications and also for participants for questions. Now I will give the floor to our third panelist, Nea Samar-Brencic from the ISRIS Institute. Nea, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Simon. I will share my screen now. So, okay. Oh, can you see the screen?
Yes, but only slides, not the full presentation.
Sorry.
The full presentation. Okay.
This is better now. Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm coming from ISRIS Institute, as Simon has pointed out. We are active in public health and e-health domain, and all the things that are going on around to support the co-creation also in e-health and in public services, to be more precise, which is also a matter of my presentation today. I have also a privilege to be part of a very large and creative group of IFTEC, International Society for Telehealth and eHealth, and I chair their working group for standards and accreditation. And this also underlines what I want to tell you today about the e-health public services and the standards that need to be implied there to be efficient. So to start with the co-creation in e-health, we have heard during the sessions, the previous sessions, and my colleagues about co-creation. Also in e-health, the system or the approach or the methods are similar, as we know that when you are ill, when you are a patient, or if anyone in your family or somebody who's close to you is a patient, you and this patient are very vulnerable. So we want to address this vulnerability with the co-creation, the process that needs to be co-created in order to serve all the participants in this process or in this life situation when you are a patient. And so co-creation basically is if you want to enhance the value of some service, the co-creation is a very good method to approach. It means that these are ongoing activities or processes by which, in this case of healthcare providers work with clients to create value. So clients are either patients or their relatives, and the opportunities to co-create to enhance value for both customers and health providers should be an integral part of the public services, we believe. So to identify the main parts of service ecosystems, make it possible to pinpoint the main drivers for co-creating sustainable value. Which means that basically to create a long-term new service solutions established with and for end users will provide a better service to society as a whole. So given the high interactivity required in the relationship between end users or stakeholders involved in digital health services, we need to apply the developed framework to e-health, for example, to read the e-health sector as a service ecosystem, so to understand it differently. Here, my colleagues who are even more experienced in this section would say we cannot just transfer the services from non-digital to digital, but we basically need to recreate the service to become a digital service or e-service. Focus needs to be on a patient, of course, or on a potential patient as the final receiver or beneficiary of the service. But since we are talking about e-governance, we understand that, or let me say that the old saying, the chain is only as strong as its weakest link. We need to consider equally all the participants in the process. So yes, the patient is the vulnerable party here, the most vulnerable, but the medical workers, the administrators, the developers, we need to think about every person in the process to have a really strong service and for the patient at the end to be served as best as possible. So to have a strong service that will adequately address the needs of the vulnerable, the elderly, or the patient, we need to have a strong system. The models for such services are being developed and have been tested also in neighboring countries and internationally through case studies represented by digital healthcare, which represents best practices in the sector. So we do have models by which we can align our development too. So let me go on. So I mentioned to pinpoint the main drivers. This is the start. This is where we can start to make a better service. To go to one of the examples that I had the privilege to work with, this is an organization that works in 100 different countries, over 100 different countries, and involves all the stakeholders, the patient associations, the developers, the large companies that develop e-health solutions, the governmental parties, the WHO, and so on. So what our vision is of course, as we are talking today about this, that the patient or the end user is in the center. But as again, I would like to stress that every party in the process is important to be included in this, to see as somebody who needs support, so not just the patient. A new model is needed to prescribe how governance in an increasingly changing world of modern healthcare could be undertaken in a successful manner. So we know that the international environment is supporting through strategies, through international, European, and national strategies to address this issue. And due COVID-19, of course, we have even addressed this more strongly. But to talk about standardization of these processes, I wanted to stress this and standards of e-health, but we need to talk about not just the technical part of the service, but of course the standardization of the process. So in order to bring the digitalization and the services closer to the patient, to everyone in the process. To conclude, basically, here are some examples, of course, of the standards already. So those we can look up to, we can take some parts of these processes to adopt. Even in Slovenia, this is what we are also working very intensely on. And to conclude, so identifying these main parts, as I mentioned, makes it possible to pinpoint the main drivers for co-creating sustainable value. And these are the steps to take to really have the successful factor raised. also for the not just for the medical part of the e-health, but also for the whole process that is behind this. We don't want to forget everybody who is in the process of bringing the service to the patient. So more in the questions, if you would like me to ask, I'm here. So back to you, Simon.
Yes, thank you very much for this presentation. I think we can take one question for you. So if anybody would like to ask something, please write down the Q&A tab. But meanwhile, I was thinking, when following your presentation, one question is just circling inside me. Of course, standards are key that we can have the services which are trustworthy, and meaning that they deliver what we expect that they should deliver. But standards are usually very highly expert topic. So how do you make a link between the needs of the users, which can be identified in the field, and then translate it into those standards? How are these methodologically working, and how do we have these safeguards that something that people really needs is then embedded in those standards?
Yeah, basically, thank you for the question, Simon. Basically, it's the other way around. We are trying to identify the needs. So like in the living lab that we have, or in co-creative sessions and so on. And the standards would just be like if you imagine a tree, a young tree, and then you need a pole there for the tree to grow. So it basically helps the creative process of some services to be in line, or to be strong, or to achieve certain goals. So standards are not are there to basically help you to see, okay, so that's where I need to go to be useful, to be successful with my service, to really address the end user needs. So the standards are there to help the service developers or implementers with that.
Okay, thank you. Since there are no more questions, we will continue with our panelists. I'm now inviting the next presentation from Brigitta Danet from the Symbiosa Genesis Social Enterprise. Please, Brigitta.
Yes. Thank you, Simon. Okay. Okay. So I just press it like this. And could you please just help me?
Yeah, maybe just try
okay. Okay, I just found
okay,
that.
perfect.
Okay. Okay. We solved the technical problem. So thank you, Simon, once again. On behalf of Symbiosa Genesis Social Enterprise, I would like to thank you to invite me to this event to present our point of view on the topic of digital transformation of an aging society. Well, for sure, aging in digital era is not easy. The gap between those who do and those who do not benefit from the digitalization is increasing due to the unstoppable ICT progress. The pandemic of COVID-19 has only highlighted this issue. Even more, it has also made a kind of revolution in the usage of digital technologies in societies on the global scale. But it has also left one of the most vulnerable groups, elderly, even more isolated and excluded from society in these pandemic-caused virtual times. It is therefore of the most importance that we as a society do not forget about the elderly and their digital literacy. Symbiosa's core activities are based on empowering all generations with digital knowledge, but we are especially focused on raising digital skills and providing access to new technologies to elderly on a daily basis and nationwide. Our main objectives objective is to bridge the gap between the elderly and the unstoppable ICT progress by actively helping them to become fearless users of ICT services, among them, of course, also e-services provided by government. Although this is, of course, a very joyful task, it is also a very, I would not say difficult, but certainly not easy task at all. Why? Well, firstly, because of the generally well-known reasons why elderly do not actively using information technologies. Firstly, there are, of course, age-related barriers such as physical disabilities, for instance, visual handicaps, then cognitive defects, limitation of motor skills. There are also geographical differences which refer to gaps in ICT usage, of course, and we must also keep in mind the socioeconomic gaps, which include differences in occupation, income, and education. Another major problem is, of course, negative attitude of the society towards older people and the prejudice against their abilities, which leads to internal resistance, self-doubt, and therefore also the lack of motivation to use technologies. But at this point, I would also like to emphasize one very important point of view. Elderly should not be seen as a homogeneous group, far from it. Like all generations, the older generation is made up of individuals. That means elderly persons, which are not identical just because of their same chronological age. And this should be taken in the considerations when we are talking about the elderly as the group of heavy users of services, including also public services, that misses out on the opportunities which are presented and available online. Not so long ago, we at Symbioza surveyed our elderly users with advanced digital skills about which online services like e-shopping, e-banking, e-government, etc. do they use or would like to learn how to use them. Well, the result of the survey was, of course, not a big surprise. And as you can see, only 30% of them use online services. As for the low use of, as you can see, the use of public e-services was ranked among the lowest. The main two answers about the using the e-services in general, the top answers were fear of additional financial cost and concern of abuse of a personal and especially, again, financial data. And among the answers why they are not using e-public services, the most common answers were that it is rather too complex or too difficult to find. But as I said, the respondents of the survey were users with advanced digital skills. But in general, from our experience working with elderly on the ICT field for more than a decade, I can say that elderly in Slovenia are more likely to have basic or no digital skills at all, more likely to be afraid of using the technologies, more likely to live in remote rural areas without possibility to access internet, and least but not least, more likely to be unable to pay for computers, smartphones, and internet. In case of Slovenia, these are for sure one of the main factors which should be taken in consideration when we're talking about the on-the-premises elderly and the digitalization, and consequently also on the low average of usage of digital services among them. But I believe, or we at Symbioza believe, that these obstacles can be overcome. of course, how? Firstly, by raising awareness of the importance of digital skills. Here I highlighted, and I will repeat it 3 times, by providing education on all levels, in all forms, so that the digital education, it's not just a sole lonely island, but it should be probably it should be incorporated in all levels of education. As far as the e-public services are concerned, they should be made more user-centered and users-friendly. Also, investments in making available the assistance and support for them to use, for elderly to use the e-services. Of course, I have written here, increase the institutional and financial support. It would be, of course, even good if it will be at least provided, so that, for instance, let's say government should pay some amount of the money for covering the internet costs for the elderly. And least but not less, increase visibility and acknowledgement of the initiatives for digital inclusion and active aging of elderly. Since in Slovenia, the role of digital empowerment of elderly is mostly entrusted in NGOs, as is Symbioza. So to conclude, all an inclusive digital society means ensuring that all citizens have full access to the digital services, and that all citizens become co-creators of the development of this digital society in which they live in. With the help of ICT technologies, all generations can, if they know how to use it, become, of course, more actively involved in society and have a better and more better life. So, to conclude, the digital society must be a society for people of all generations. Thank you. Back to you, Simon.
Okay, thank you, Brigitta. Do you have any question for this presentation on how to include elderly population into the digital society? Okay, I can see no questions, so I will ask you something, Brigitta. We have seen many different attempts in Slovenia, projects also by the civil society, NGOs, and other stakeholders, trying to increase these digital skills of elderly population. But it seems that this effectiveness, the results are not always what we expected. So the government lately decided to go into more strategic approach by really dedicated a big funding for increasing the digital skills of elderly and also younger population. So do you think this is what we lacked so far in Slovenia? Is this more governmental, top-down, systematic, strategic approach? Or do you think that this will also not really answer what is the real problem in the field, as you are working in the field? Thank you.
Well, to be honest, I really do not have the opinion on this strategic thing that government is doing right now. Of course, I hope that it will be successful and it will bring some results. But what I mean, and what we see from the field, there is a lot of need from the elderly, in which we work the most. It's a crave for this kind of for learning, digital learning. But there is what we mostly find in working, that they don't have informations where can they get this digital learning to get the digital skills. So I think if some in this party, if this would be, let's say, more popularized, if government will do at least this, so that they will know, like they were talking about the vouchers and, you know, the things, maybe it will improve the things. But to be honest, we have to wait and see.
Okay, thank you, Brigitta, for being honest. This is what remains in
Yeah,
the
this
NGO
is
sector
what
at the end of the
NGOs
day.
are for.
Yes, I see that. Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. And last but not the least, on our agenda, we have presentation from Sarah Kjellstrand from Funka organization. Sarah, please, I invite you to make your presentation. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Things keep popping up just when I was about to press one button, then something else happened. And this is really what accessibility is all about in practice. There are lots of things happening on our screens every time. So the first challenge is to get the presentation going. So I'm really happy to be here today to have the possibility to contribute to the discussion. And I was also particularly happy to hear previous speakers talk about accessibility. Also in the way that we mean accessibility, that everybody can access the information, not just the availability of the information, that it's there, but really that everyone can use it as well. So I work at Funka, and we are accessibility specialists, and particularly web accessibility. So we help public organizations, but also private organizations in Sweden, but also throughout Europe, to understand what accessibility is about in practice and how to implement it when building public services. So this is a brief introduction really to accessibility, and the key points that I want to make here is what is accessibility about, how is it relevant to digital public services, and how can you actually practice web accessibility? So how can it be applied in the design process? And that per se is several hours of training, but just to give you a few points to where you can start. So what are we talking about when we speak about accessibility? It's really about making products and services that everyone can use regardless of their ability. And one of the key points here is that if we make products and services that are easy for people with the greatest challenges to use, then it also makes the products and services better for everyone. So cleaner and clearer and less complex services are generally easier to use and more attractive for everybody, regardless of whether you have a disability or not. So in practice, what it comes down to is that it's a human-centered design that provides the flexibility for different needs. We all have a variety of needs, and people both with and without disabilities need to have a simple and intuitive access to information. So just to give you an example in terms of web accessibility, one need can be, for example, to be able to access the information through assistive technology like screen readers. So then web accessibility is about making the interfaces compatible to assistive technology, but it's also about the content so that you can understand and easily grasp the content of public service websites. And what we have seen is that the complexity of the website is not only about the interface, how many things are on there, is it easy to use the buttons or the drop-down menus, but it's also a lot about understanding the context. So to avoid really different and complex language and to use plain language, for example. So how can accessibility increase the quality and the impact of digital services? Well, it's all about services that make a difference. So if you have a service that is easy to understand and relate to, it automatically creates a greater interest and an increased willingness of persons of all walks of life to use the public service. So this in turn improves the outreach and it makes a positive impact on society, both in terms of the outreach of the service, but also to promote participation and inclusion and to really close the digital divide. So just to give you a few keys to success here, it's a bit of a repetition, but that's the key way to learn. So a product or service that everyone can use is also about communication on the service. So it's both about the interface and the elements on the interface, but it's about the content, be able to understand the content and the communication around the service, so you can easily find it and use it. So the product and service that everyone can use, plus understandable communication, provides for more users and higher impact. And in terms of web accessibility, this can, for example, be about providing accessible public information on a website. So you will have more visitors to the website where you have the information. And you can also save money, because if people do not understand the information on the website, they will call the help desk, or you will have need to provide information in alternative formats. But if the web page is as accessible as possible from the beginning, there is a lesser need to provide separate services that can usually be costly. So you will improve the outreach and also create more impact and a better public image. So how can you do this in practice? How can accessibility be included in service design and development? Well, the key thing to remember here is that accessibility is not something that you add on in the end once you have developed everything. You can do it, but it's really, really expensive. And probably you have to redo design flaws that are there from the beginning. So you really need to start with setting up inclusive requirements from the beginning. Think about the users. What are their variety of needs? And there are different things you can do here. You can talk to users, which is usually the best way to get information. But there is also tons of free material to use on personas that can give information on how persons with specific needs use interfaces and websites. And you can also use the universal design principles of flexible use, equitable use, tolerance for errors. And this will already give you a better possibility to have a more intuitive and easier to use service from the beginning. And then throughout the project, it's important to really check that it's accessible. So to test with users throughout the development project. And sometimes, or quite often, we have seen that you test with users in the end when everything is already set up. But if you find out a design flaw that was there from the beginning, it's really, really difficult to make something about it. So it's better to start early and to have the concept and really talk to users. Once you have developed the concept, just do a check with users. And then throughout the process, as you do iterations on the design and the development, it can seem like a hassle to actually have to go back to people all the time when you're developing, but you will save so much time and effort in the end if you just do these things throughout the process. And then in the end, it's all about content and accessible communication and dissemination. So to get the message through, you also need to make sure that the content is easy to understand and that the communication around the service is accessible. So just to end up with the main message, that is that accessibility makes sure that digital services are usable and attractive to everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I think we have a question from Charlotte. Sarah, can you see the question in Q&A tab?
Could you give an example of an accessibility improvement you made to a public service? So what was the process and what was the impact of the change? Yes, well, in recent years, so this is something we did last year with a municipality in Sweden. And what they wanted to do was to get a better outreach of their information to people with that doesn't have Swedish as a mother tongue, because it was a municipality where they had perhaps 50 or different nationalities, and they couldn't really understand the information that got sent through from the public authority. First of all, they couldn't really see what information was for them. What do I need to do? Do I need to pay something? Do I need to access the website? Or is this just general information on what is out there in the public service? So we did an analysis of how they do the communication, and we had a norm-critical, this is a very Swedish way of thinking of it, but it really says that you shouldn't take your user for granted. Really look at different needs of different users. So we had a non-critical look at the way that they conceive the users and the way that they then sort of conceptualize the public information. And so in the end, what they did was to come up with a communication process that also helped them to take into account different factors of different needs. And to really, what made a difference to them was to differentiate, be able to differentiate the information so that people understood, okay, I really need to do something now. And this is just not general information. And that really made a difference for them. And I don't have the figure in my head now, but their main motivation for doing this was that they have service offices open for everyone to come. And they were really swamped with people that came with their paper and said, I don't understand this. My Swedish is perhaps poor, but really, could you be clearer, please? And what they wanted to do was to have accessible information online to be able to have fewer people answering questions in the service desk.
Okay, Sarah, thank you very much for this answer. Now I will jump back to Elisa with her first presentation, and also that we have all the presentation covered by questions. Elisa, are you here with us?
Yes.
Okay, great. So going back to your presentation, we now see in Europe that there is more than 2 decades of experimenting, piloting different projects on e-participation going on, also heavily funded by the European Union. What would be your I assume, I understand we together are in the project, which is also taking a stock of these practices and trying to find out what are the key elements of success factors. Could you please share with us what is, in your opinion, the key success factors for e-participation in the future in Europe?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question, Simon. Yes, you are right in saying that in the past few decades, actually, there have been many, many different e-participation activities happening across Europe. Unfortunately, though, what we can see is that sometimes these sort of activities are not very well documented and not very well reported. And another thing that I had actually put in the slide on the recommendation was about the feedback loop. So making sure that after a certain e-participation process, you actually go back to the citizens to ask them, for example, if they were satisfied with the process, and also to monitor constantly how their inputs actually follow, for example, a policy cycle, and if they actually have impact on legislation. And unfortunately, through my research, I have seen that it is very hard to understand if these potentials of e-democracy actually do enhance, you know, the improvements of our democracies in Europe. So I think that what is important is that we create a sort of assessment framework of these e-participation activities that are happening, something that can be considered as a universal assessment framework. We're actually doing that in a consortium of 12 partners in a project called Co-Deciding Europe. Here we have tried to, with different researchers across Europe, we have tried to create what can be called a universal assessment framework. And this assessment framework is meant to do comparative analysis of e-participation processes in Europe in order to understand what are the key success factors, as you were asking. And key success factors are the ones that I've also put in the recommendations. They're all around the accessibility, so the user-friendliness of a technological platform, how this process has been communicated from governments to the citizens is crucial. And I talked about managing expectations of citizens, because if these digital democracy practices do not meet the expectations of the citizens, it can actually backfire and lead to the frustration of citizens. So communications and even marketing, I would say, is key. And also I would say that a success factor, since we're talking about accessibility, is to make sure that these technological platforms also have in parallel something offline for those who, first of all, cannot participate on the technological platform, but also those who do not want to participate on the technological platform. There are also other key success factors, of course, that are all around the impact. So making sure that these contributions actually lead to something, and there are not just, just to open up to citizens that use their time and effort and never see their recompensation afterwards. So these are just some of them, but hopefully we can also share in the upcoming months this assessment framework, where we will be listing the success factors and also how people can do comparative analysis of e-participation. I will just put in the chat the Co-Deciding Europe project as well.
Please, thank you. So thank you very much, Elisa. I believe we exhausted all our questions. There's no more questions. Also, thank you very much for the panelists for their excellent presentations, sharing experience, also providing what is very important, the key recommendations and the key takeaways from the issues that this panel was intended to address. All those key points and the recommendations were already submitted to the conference organizers, which will take them to the final plenary session of this conference. So please stay on the conference and attend the final discussion with the prominent speakers who will take stock of all what was happening today, and they will reflect on those key issues of government-centered human-centered digital services. Many thanks from my side. Also, I would just like to point out a little detail from the Eurobarometer survey that I shared with you in the beginning of this session. What is making me optimistic that we are working in the right direction is that, according to the survey, the most important digital principle that the Europeans think should define the European approach to digital life is that everyone should be including all people with disabilities or at risk of exclusion should benefit from easily accessible and user-friendly digital public services. This principle was highlighted as the most important among the principles that should define European approach to digital life, which tell us that in Europe there is this higher big sensibility that also social justice should be a key component of digital transformation. And hopefully politicians, decision makers will listen to this public opinion, and that more strategical, more also practical measures are going to be taken by the EU member states to improve those key segments of digital transformation of Europe. So thank you very much again to all for listening, being part of this session. And I'm now handing over the floor to the conference organizers. Thank you very much.